Thanks, Alison, and hello, everyone. So, yes, it does sound like I do lots of things, and I have. But my main thing is to take us back to the core of who we are and which an intelligence that we all have. We couldn't possibly exist without, and should reclaim it at that very human level. So you might find today a little bit light-hearted, and that's exactly the spirit that I want to take you all into for the rest of the few days that you've got together. And in that spirit, we can actually harness all kinds of connections that we may not if we just sort of sit here really seriously in our bodies, very still. I started off here. Where's the clicker? Here? Because that's a picture of a bee, and I like to think that bees are a wonderful kind of guide for considering our relationship with the environment, and also they also act as a metaphor for thinking about the multiple perspectives because their eyes are so multifaceted. And so one of the things about creativity is actually igniting our own capacity to see from multiple perspectives. One of the things that I think that we can turn the volume up on is actually the potential for us to oscillate between our interior awareness and the awareness that we take out into the world. So most of us here would be working in very professional contexts with a lot of expertise, and we take ourselves out into the world and we're often acting with, really invested interest in improving the world, but we often improve on the world, and we take this sort of exchange set of cells into our situations, and we kind of somehow abandon who we are inside of us when we go into those contexts. It's not that it's not there. It is there. We wouldn't even be breathing if it wasn't there, but we sort of put that into the background, and then somehow we go, okay, when we're at home or with our friends, that's when we can bring that part of ourselves into being. So what I'm wanting to do today is to encourage an awareness and a permission in ourselves, because I think our professional training, our education, even the settings that we create, and you're all in that space of creating settings, creating atmospheres, what are we doing as sort of defaults that are cultural defaults that are creating behaviours and practices of ourselves, habits of attention that might be actually shutting down some of the capacities that we have within ourselves that mean that we can connect in more powerful ways within ourselves and also between ourselves. So little exercise. What I want to do today also is not just talk, but do. And reveal that some of the kinds of practices and exercises that we do at the TD school, the transdisciplinary school over here, which is about practicing a whole suite of creative methods that are being practiced by people from all kinds of different disciplinary backgrounds, and how we can bring things back into the space and they can ignite different ways of doing ourselves and performing ourselves. So I'd like to invite you to draw, whether you've got a pen. I'm assuming that some people will have phones and some people will have pens and notepads. If you have a phone, I'm assuming you have a note taking app of some description with a drawing capacity, with your finger. And if you've got a piece of paper and a pen, cool. And I'd like you to, and it may mean that there's a few people who have to move a little bit, draw the person. You might have done this exercise before, but it's always fun. I'd like you to draw the person next to you without looking at your piece of paper or your phone. So quick portrait drawing, very quick, 15 seconds.
Sure. You're a drawer on that. What's the what? You're just go in fine. Okay. That's the chief.
If you haven't found someone, just turn around and draw the person who's next to you. Just draw someone.
I don't know. What are we doing here?
Or you can draw me.
George, go over the top.
I'm not doing you. Okay.
That is, oh yeah, that's pretty good. Kind of looks like Fred Flintstone. I don't know. Oh yeah. All right, come on back. I'm back. Slow down. I'm kind of curious. That's quite good. Yeah, you know that's a loose. You know that's a loose.
Okay. Mississippi must be a kind of go.
It's a potato. All right, I'm going to say that, Karen.
I've done this exercise with so many different people. And every time it recalibrates the room. Can you notice the laughter and the joy? But the other thing is this activity, normally I would sort of cast this out to the room, but I don't really quite got enough time to be that interactive. So, but one of the things that this exercise does is it causes us to make eye contact with each other in a really safe way. Eye contact causes human connection. It kicks off oxytocin and all kinds of things that help bring us into a relationship. It also kicks off play and playfulness in this safe way because we're all on the same play field. We're all going to probably do a kind of weird drawing, and it doesn't matter, even if we're really accomplished drawers. At the same time, we are inviting in all kinds of sensory awareness. And so, I've done this with, really accomplished film directors and, people who, don't do any, would say, I am not a creative person. And we all come to the same place. And hopefully what you're doing, I'd just like you to take a beat and just kind of feel how your face feels, feel how your body feels, and kind of notice if there's just sort of a bit of a shift inside. And that's what I want to also talk about, is this sort of honing of what I call interoception, or take a beat to get to that at the very end, and how this links to our flow state and our play state, and how this actually is part of honing our creativity and intuition. So these are coalescing of connections inside of us and between us, so that we read the room at a much more subtle way. We'll pick up things, we'll create relationships, and we'll stimulate the care factor between us. So one of the beautiful things that happens when we are in the creative moment is we move from feeling disconnected to feeling connected. We have a felt shift. And that's what I'm just hoping you might have just had a little bit of a moment of, just that felt shift. And if you can remember that and look for that in all your interactions, whether you're in a meeting or whether you're out there in the environment, wherever you are, to kind of look for that sense of connection. When we're in that sense of connection, we do wonderful things together. And also we are harnessing a much wider sense of who we are and what we are in terms of our cognition. You move to this sense of belonging. And I know everyone in this room is in the care space. So we do want to care, and we do want to stimulate that sense of belonging and that sense of calmness and connection. But the more we practice that ourselves, the more likely we are to ignite that in a kind of cumulative and coalescing way. So I want to just take a beat and kind of give clay a platform. This is being stimulated by probably one of my favourite scholars. His name is Stuart Brown. He's a psychiatrist, and he spent a lot of time working with people who may have been in their kind of zenith in terms of their career, or they may have been really depressed. Some people work really hard and they love what they do, and then they kind of reach this flat line and they're like, it's just not doing it for me anyway. Anyway, he just worked with all these different people, and he got to this place where he said, I need to help them access their inner player, their play, and they've lost their sense of play. And he says that play is something that is actually intrinsic to learning and growing, lifelong learning. And play is where, just like that little activity we did, we handicap the power between us. So we create a level playing field. So we're all drawing without looking. That's a handicap. So it's trying to put us all in a space where we can all connect without there being a necessary hierarchy. And there's a different kind of knowledge exchange. So if you think the masters of play are children, And if you want to kind of harness your inner player, then just go and play with some of the young humans who are out here, and they give us permission. I've done these sorts of play things with people who are CEOs of organisation, and they go back and they play with their kids, and they go, "That's what I've forgotten to do, and I've forgotten to do it in my workplace." So this is where we explore boundaries and push against the edges and kind of go, oh, is that just something that we're ritualistically practicing, or we become blindsided to, and we don't actually need to do it this way. So a lot of the things that come up against silos are actually partly because we're just practicing stuff because they're habits, and there are ways around them, and we can explore, we can push things very subtly, and we can discover new possibilities together. Play seems purposeless, and in our workplace, we often go, oh, we're wasting time. Often that's when we're actually subjugating our inner play type, and we're actually repressing the opportunities to connect together and to explore more widely. So then we're shutting down the range of who we are and what we can be together. Yet play is actually neurologically the condition in which we make connections, we synergize information, we synthesize things. And if we don't give ourselves permission to step into that place, we actually inhibit the neurological conditions that create those new connections between and within ourselves. So play, Stuart Brown says, is the opposite of play is not work. He says it's depression. And when we're talking depression, we're talking a repressed state of being. We're not using the full range of our capacities. So I just thought I'd quickly acknowledge that, I work in a space, the TD School was set up, and it's something that I feel very fortunate to work in a place like this, because for a long time I've worked a lot across a lot of different disciplinary contexts, and more or less sort of being aware of this notion of wicked problems or intractable challenges, the silos, blah, blah, blah. These things have been around for a really long time. And the TD School has been set up to try and create conditions and practices so that we can work beyond those intractable, seemingly intractable dilemmas that we find ourselves in. So some of the kind of conditions that we can say are kind of probably shared, and I'm assuming that you share them as well, is this sense that we are constantly in environments where we're working to risk and regulation and policies and schedules, meeting. Yet we have this drive to want to care, and we know that the world is dynamic. We know the world is in relationship with us, and we know that it's complex. We know all this, but we seem to keep doing the same old thing. What is going on? So this is where the idea of creativity comes in, and the idea of reimagining our mind. So I thought, okay, who could I kind of, out of all the people that I'd read and been inspired by, and all the people that we, as scholars in the academic world where we think a lot and read a lot and talk a lot about ideas, who would be one person who I could sort of point to you to today, and who I know we have all been inspired by, and it's Ian McGilchrist. He is a polymath extraordinaire. Some people say he will be regarded in the future a bit like Darwin, in that he's such a complex expert across so many mediums. He's a psychiatrist, he's a neuroscientist, he's a historian, he's a philosopher, and he's an English literature specialist. And he weaves all these things together. And most of what he's come up with is really derived from his work in psychiatry and neuroscience. He argues that culturally, over a long period of time, through our education system, through the way that we design the world, we have moved the way that we attend to the world and use our minds so that we preference what he calls the left hemisphere and the left hemisphere thinking. Now that needs a little bit of a revision, because we have a kind of 70s notion that is still very popular, and it kind of has segregated what the left and the right hemisphere do in sort of the left hemisphere does the kind of serious thinking and the right does the colourful thinking. That's a gross simplification. You have to read the book to really get into it, but he talks about how the left and the right hemisphere are both very integrated with each other. We couldn't kind of operate without each, but each attends to the world in a different way. And he argues that we move more and more through our attention practices towards what we call preferencing the left hemisphere. And we oscillate less and less between looking at the holistic context or the relational context and the specific focus context. So if I think about how I practice myself during work and my work days, I would say that we, even in the most educated, well-intended people, tend to spend a lot of time in their left hemisphere, and they're not aware that they're in their left hemisphere. So there are a lot of little practices, but they're often the practices that we think culturally are kind of for recreation. So this goes back to the notion of play. If we can give ourselves more time to practice the sort of play stuff, what we're actually doing is helping to return to a kind of attention that looks at the world through the right hemisphere. And I'm not saying one or the other is better. It's about a symphony, moving between the two and becoming more adept at it. So I would call it becoming neurologically and mentally ambidextrous. So some of the things that we've learned about the way the hemispheres work is not because you can kind of isolate the hemispheres easily. You can't. We would usually not survive. So the insights that we've got from the way the hemispheres work are usually because people have had fairly extreme events. They've had strokes or lesions that mean that one part of their brain really is only functioning. It's very rare that you can get this kind of isolated condition, but it does help us to understand what happens when the left hemisphere or the right hemisphere is predominantly functioning. So just very quickly, what we've been able to deduce, and this is such a speed date, and anyone who's really into this will be like, oh, it's this and it's this. So I say it with caution, but the left hemisphere pays attention to the world in a very literal and explicit way. It believes the stories that it creates, and it actually likes to abstract and keep creating. It would prefer to make a story up about its own story than to kind of put it back to the context and go, does that resonate? It's serialized, it is use-focused and utility-focused. It's like, what's the point of this? If you're sitting in a meeting and people are pushing for that, then you know that the orientation is already leaning into the left. There are times and places for all these things. It also has greater inhibitory power over the right hemisphere, so you can say, just be quiet, we don't want to hear from you. And so if we have a bias towards that, we just keep amplifying that bias. It also loves abstraction. So when we are in this sort of abstraction of abstractions and we're moving away, we sort of feel like the intention was this, but why are we over there? We can go, okay, we've actually started to use our minds, our collective minds, in a way that is biased. And so what can we do to bring ourselves back? So the right hemisphere, it looks for something that is new. It looks for connection. It looks for relations. It's open to possibility, the player types. It's grounded. It's very much in the present. So that little activity we did again is also very much about being in the present. Has a longer working memory. And one of the best hacks is to notice for when you see humour or metaphor or anything that's connected to the body. So the right hemisphere also has greater connectivity to the body. So some of the hacks that I like to use is stuff that is connected to sensory experiences, because when we start to use our senses, we're actually inviting our body and our wider imagination into the room. Ultimately, you want to be able to switch between the two. And the things that I'm going to talk about for the rest of today are about being able to kind of switch. And in the moment right now, I could just say, okay, can you just for a sec notice the sensation of your clothes on your body? Where is it pressing? Where are you feeling free? Is your skin breathing? Skin is about 3 meters squared. It's our biggest organ, but we don't pay much attention to it. And you've just expanded your imagination. You've just oscillated, and you're back in the room, and we can focus. That's the kind of thing that we can do all the time. Another one I want to focus on, this is a beautiful, beautiful hack, is thinking about metaphors, because metaphors is where we bind our collective experience, our values, our memories, and often a lot of our default thinking. So as we go through to the rest of today, I'd like you to just kind of consider what metaphors you would use for your work in healthcare design? Would it be a mechanical metaphor or would it be a living metaphor? Just something to hang in the back of your mind, and you might come up with certain things. I'll give you an example that I often play with. I drive past RPA most days to get to work, and I usually think of it as kind of like the workshop for health. It feels like it's set up a bit like an auto garage, but it's sort of, for bodies and humans. And then I think, is that how I'd like to think about it? And what else could it be? So just a little kind of prompt, and we'll come back to that later. Okay, so moving on with this sort of idea of what do we think intelligence is? How do we get here? Have we got an interhemispherical bias? One of the things in this space is the idea of also what do we think the mind is? So often what we think intelligence is and what we think the mind is, we think the mind is sort of up here in our bone helmet. And then usually what that means is actually we think the mind is really a section of our mind and we're using a particular part of our mind. And we often ignore the rest of who we are. So I love to think of the mind as distributed through our central nervous system, our whole central nervous system. Our hands, our hands have so many sensory connections, our organs. And if you start to think of your whole body as part of who you are and how you think, you start to actually tap into this much wider repository of experience and interconnection. And what you're actually doing is sparking on the whole realm up here rather than just very specific parts of yourself. Then you can get into these deeper layers. You probably come across the iceberg model at some stage, which is, what are the underlying drivers of all of this? Well, my proposition is that we are using very narrow parts of our thinking, especially when we come together. And so we're never going to get to the causal layers because we're not getting to the stuff that sits inside of us, underneath us, and drives us into these default behaviors. So this is where creativity comes in. It's our magic wand, it's our box for opening up space. And there's all kinds of tools and tricks that we have been doing forever. But we really do need to give it space to breathe and invite it into our situations. And we can do this very, very, very easily. So I've got the box there because often people say, think outside the box. Well, I love to say, what about inside the box? There's all kinds of possibilities within the box. And we are often just missing the opportunity. So my publication again today is as you go around today, as you listen for the next few days, and as you go out into your practice in the future, what stuff is right in front of you that you could so simply shift that might recalibrate how you think, how you attend, how you relate. And it might just slowly just like alter the kind of tone just a little bit, which might help to kind of move the dial of some of the intractable dilemmas that you find yourself in. So Antonio Damasio, another really great neuroscientist, he talks about how creativity is a part of our homeostatic cultural impulse. In other words, this is the way that we collectively change the world around us, and we have been doing it for millennia. And design is one of those spaces, but it's also a cultural thing. So creativity is not something that you can kind of go, okay, here's a formula, let's turn it on. I want to bring it online. In fact, it's like a turtle. It will pull its head in and will go, no way, I'm not here today for you. It happens when we're relaxed. It helps us synthesize. It's polysensory. So this idea that you can't, function and do more things at once. You can't multitask. Well, our brain is multitasking all the time. It is processing more than one form of sensory information. So we can process lots of information at once. Maybe it's difficult to do a dedicated task, but the way that creativity works is that we need to be in a relaxed state in order for it to come online. The biggest problem with our kind of scheduled lives is that creativity might try and come online, but what happens is we go, oh no, sorry, you can't come online right now because I've got better and more important things to do. So we miss lots of opportunities. And creative people are really good. And if you sort of read stories of like how cinematographers and musicians work or whatever, they go, hang on a minute, I know we've got something right here and we're going to move with that right now. We're going to drop what we thought was important and then go with what we are feeling is right there. And I think in most of our professional lives, we have moved away from those kinds of practices. So how do we bring those back in so that what I would say we can riff together better? So how do we access our creativity? How do we bring it online? How do we bring it into the mix with it, in our day to day? So the stuff that I'm talking about is not something that you go away and you go to like the creativity gym. What I'm talking about is how can you kind of bring this in day to day, moment to moment, and shape what we do. So paying attention to our senses. This is that extended part of our body that we often forget about. And we can do this in all kinds of different ways by just simply doing repetitive activity. So if you were just listening to me now and you were doodling, you're engaging in repetitive activity, and that in and of itself will trip off your inner learner and your creative mix, because even just repetition itself is calming, and it invites a whole range of other kinds of mental activity or neurological activity. Repetitive activity, meditative activity, often our best ideas come in the shower or when we're walking, and attending to these fleeting feelings. So that's the stuff that we tend to just not pay that much attention to. And this is where intuition gets developed, because when we really pay attention to those momentary signals and kind of go, okay, that's actually telling me something. It could even be something like goosebumps on your skin. And you go, oh no, it's just cold or whatever, I just had a thing. Instead of going, hang on a minute, my body is reacting. What is that about? What is that memory that's connected to that? So everyone will be different, but the habits of attention help us oscillate between these two different kinds of attention that the left and the right hemisphere are constantly in dialogue about. Just very quickly, I'd like you to close your eyes, and I would like you to listen to the soundscape around us. I'd like you to notice the high noises, the low noises, even sort of to notice how you might be in a 3D way mapping the space, how far things are away, how close things are to you, and you'll become aware that there's so much information coming to you through sound. And then just a little bit of a moment to notice your own breath, and maybe even some of the sounds of your own body. Okay, and then open your eyes again. So again, just expanded your attention. We're back in the room, we're focusing again. And you can keep doing this, it's so quick and it's so easy. What this also does, it helps us to attend to the glimpses and to notice these things, what I would call embodied intelligence and embodied awareness. So again, it's that distributed idea of the body. And we know, and I'm sure in all work that you do, that you are constantly working with embodiment and the embodied intelligence. But often we will do that as a practice, but we may not do that in terms of how we tune ourselves. So this is one of the things I've learned from actors is they're constantly reading the room and they're constantly calibrating. Am I vibing with you? Doctors do this all the time too. Teachers do it. Is someone paying attention to me? How is my tone of voice impacting them? And there's all sorts of wonderful psychological experiments that show how wise the body is and how much we will make assessments and judgments based on embodied information, but we will logically deny that it had anything to do with it. So we can give someone a warm glass of water or a cup of tea, and if the ambient conditions are consistent, we will evaluate that person as warmer and more trustworthy than someone who was given a cold glass of water. But we will deny that that glass of water had anything to do with that evaluation. So these are the sorts of things that are helping to affirm the significance of embodied information. You might have heard things like, if I'm having a chat to you and you do this and I do this, I'm going to trust you more. So there's all that kind of subtle stuff happening between us all the time. So these are the things that we can take into our interactions moment to moment, and they just subtly attune us. But we don't spend a lot of time practicing that because, hey, we've got more important, serious stuff to do. Okay, so this goes back to this notion that I started off with, interoception. become oscillating between the sense of what's going on inside of us and between us, and just being a little bit more aware and practicing that. That's the attention hack that takes us into being able to notice where we're sitting and also how we're interacting. So are we in our flow space? That's that creative space of being in the zone. And there's a whole bunch of other stuff we could talk to you about being in the zone and tapping into our creativity. But the critical thing here is to notice, are we being stretched, but not stretched so much that it's causing us to feel anxious, and not being stretched or not stretched so that we're bored. And reading the room to know that everybody, all the diverse minds in the room, are somehow been given a place and a space to flow and a place and a space to interact. And there's a whole lot of stuff that we could kind of go. That's another whole session. So back to the metaphors, just for a moment. Did you come up with some metaphors? Did you notice, and I'm just going to hang this in the air because I've done this in many, many different contexts, and I've come back to people 6 months later and they're like, wow, I have really noticed the metaphors that I'm using. And the fun thing to do is, once you start to notice the metaphors that you're playing with, start to try and change them. And what you'll not start to notice is that you're actually activating your creativity, and you're playing with the values and assumptions that are in the room or in your own psyche. And you can actually discover defaults and behaviors and habits of mind that you are not aware of, and that you may well have just inherited, and you can change it. So playing with metaphors is one of the most fun and simple ways to access creativity, personally and collectively. 2 quick stories to finish with. So we all work in the care sector. I do work in the care sector. I work with health researchers. And this is a story from one of my colleagues who worked in a hospital system, and he's an artist. And what he did was he spent time durationally in a hospital. So it was an ethnographic process, and he stayed in the hospital all day. And what he started to notice, he's a sound artist, and he was recording this hospital corridor, and he noticed there was a door that was slamming. And then he noticed that this door was well above the permittable decibels. And then he started to notice that door slammed 247 times in the day. But he was the only one to notice that it was slamming like that, because he was sitting there and everybody else was bang, bang, bang. It's just once off. And then he started to sort of notice that if you were someone who was in that hospital bed just there, you'd be hearing that going all day. But then he took it up the line. He was like, this hospital door is it's broken and it's fixing. Can we change it? And it was like, oh, well, you need to go here. You need to go there. And then he took it to the committee, and it was 3 months before they were going to be able to make a decision. And then they had to come up with money. And these are the kinds of intractable things that I'm sure you are all working with. So my question is, what could you do? What can you do in those situations? Like, could you soften the door? Could you fix it? Like, some of these things, they're so dumb that they endure, and they're somehow connected to our processes, and somehow connected to the care factor, and somehow they inhibit our agency. So surely there are certain things that we can do things about. So another story. This is a very simple story. Years ago, I was working with Carers New South Wales, and we were doing something for Carers Week here at UTS just after the first lockdown. And we were doing a performance, and we wanted to pose a question around what does care mean to you on the window of Building 2, which is our shiny new building over just across the road. And I had heard that somebody had put a decal on the window before to advertise something. So I thought, okay, we can post this question on the window. Everyone can drive past and I'll notice it. Perfect stage. So I went to try and find out if I could get this question on the window. Started literally down the bottom of the tower, underneath, in the belly where facilities were. Who do I talk to put a decal on the window? Oh no, there's a rule. You cannot put a decal on the window, the architect said. And then but you know what, this really matters. This is just straight after COVID. Look, I really care about this. I've got no authority to do it, but I'll send you up to level 4. Same thing again. And then it was like, my wife's a psychologist, this is the guy who was above facilities. And he was like, I don't have any authority to change this, but look, it really matters. I'm going to take you up to level 6. Anyway, through the day, I went up literally up the tower to the top person who was in charge of all of QTS's facilities. Each time I was referred because the person I spoke to cared, and they had a care story. And by the end of the day, the guy who was in charge of the whole of UTS facility said, look, we really do have a rule that you're not supposed to put anything on the window, but I know that there has been. And he said, look, let me take it to the committee. We've got a meeting tonight, and I'll let you know tomorrow morning, because I had to have that decision by tomorrow morning. He rang me up and he said, look, Barbara, this really matters. We all really care, and you can do it. So it was persistence, but the thing that really drove that whole thing for me was that everyone cared. And when you can find the care factor, people will do things. So that goes back to this notion of relationship and those simple things that are meaningful to people. If you can find the meaningfulness, whether it's a tiny moment or a bigger moment, we can do things, and we can work with those seemingly intractable rules and regulations. And even if it's just a sticker on the window, that can make a difference. Last thing is, if you want to kind of play with some of these little practices that I've kind of exposed you to, or you want to kind of even go further, we have a book that has a card kit and more explanation behind some of the things I've talked about. We have courses, blah, 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 blah. So you can just take a deeper dive there. And thank you so much.